Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're tackling something pretty big. It's a topic that gets thrown around a lot, especially online, and it can get really heated. We're talking about personal value and this idea of how we measure it differently for men and women. So let's just jump right in, shall we? You've probably heard this idea floating around, right? The claim that women are just born valuable, while men have to go out and earn their worth. It's a really powerful, really simple statement. But is it actually true? Well, here's the thing. That simple idea, it's a bit of a mess. It's a huge oversimplification, really. It takes all these really complex things, like, mate preferences, our roles in society, status, and just crams them all into this one neat little box. And honestly, it's pretty misleading. So, to really get to the bottom of this, we're not going to just trade opinions. No, we're going to do something better. We're going to dig into a comparative analysis from Dr. Ronnie Rodas. He's developed this incredible research framework that gives us a set of tools to look at this whole thing with some much needed clarity. All right, let's take a look at Dr. Rodas' research framework. The cool thing about his work is that it's not trying to give us one simple silver bullet answer. Instead, it's more like a toolkit, right? It gives us the ability to analyze this question from a bunch of different evidence-based angles. So instead of just looking at this through one lens, his framework actually combines 5 complementary theories. And these aren't just pulled out of thin air, they come from psychology, sociology, and even economics. This whole multi-angle approach is what lets us see all the different forces that might be at play in any given situation. It's pretty smart. And here they are. You've got sexual strategies theory, which, you guessed it, is all about dating and mating. Then there's social role theory, which looks at how our jobs and the expectations society has for us shape our value. Objectification theory, that's a big one. It gets into the intense pressure, especially on women, to look a certain way. And finally, you've got expectation states and signaling theories, which are all about how we communicate value through things like, say, a fancy job title or a luxury car. Okay, so we've got the theories, that's great, but now what? We need a way to organize all the different signals people use to show their value. I mean, how do you even begin to sort through all of that information? Well, this is where Dr. Rodas's work gets really practical. He created something called a code book. The best way to think about it is like a super organized sorting system, a filing cabinet for different kinds of value signals. It's what lets us compare everything apples to apples. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Check out how Dr. Rodas's codebook breaks this down. You see that top row? That's what he calls men-coded signals. Things like career, status, being a provider. Then in the middle, you have women-coded signals. Stuff like attractiveness, youth, style. But, and this is so important, look at that bottom row. It's a huge category of shared signals. Things like kindness, being reliable, intelligence, charisma, stuff that applies to absolutely everyone. And this diagram really brings it all together, doesn't it? It's a great visual map. You can clearly see those separate domains that are traditionally coded male or female. But look how big that shared area is at the bottom. It really drives home the point that, yeah, there are differences in what society emphasizes, but there's also this massive and I think growing overlap where we're all looking for the same fundamental qualities in each other. Okay, so we've got the framework, we've got the code book. The next logical question is, what happens when you actually use it? Dr. Rodas put it to the test with a pilot study, analyzing a whole bunch of existing research. So what did he find? What patterns started to pop out? All right, first, finding. When you look at which of those 5 theories pops up the most in the research that's already out there, it's sexual strategies theory, by a long shot. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that a huge chunk of the conversation around this topic, at least in academia, has been really, really focused on dating and mating. And you can see that focus play out right here in this chart. See that? There's a definite cluster of studies all about appearance-based value for women, and another cluster over here about earned status for men. No big surprise there, right? But what's really telling is that the biggest single chunk of research, that one on the far left, is the one that looks at both men and women, often in a mixed social context. So it's not all so clear-cut. So what's the big takeaway here? The pilot study basically confirms that, yeah, some of those traditional patterns are still very real. Men often get judged on what they achieve, and women face a ton of pressure about their appearance. But, and this is the key, that's not the whole story, not even close. The full picture is way more complex. Those shared values like kindness and reliability are becoming more and more important. And at the end of the day, context is everything. So that simple born versus earned idea, it just completely falls apart when you look at the evidence. So this all leads us to a much smarter, more nuanced way of looking at this whole value thing. It's really time to move beyond that simplistic black and white binary, you know? Dr. Radis proposes a really cool concept here. He calls it the signal economy. Think about it like this. We all operate in a system where we're constantly sending out signals to communicate our value. Some of those signals are what he calls certified, things like a college degree or a job title. They're officially validated. Others are visible, like your personal style or how fit you are. And the thing is, both men and women are part of this economy, but we're often pushed or incentivized to focus on broadcasting different kinds of signals. So instead of just throwing around a vague, loaded word like value, this research gives us a really simple, practical way to make these conversations way more productive. The secret? You just like to ask one simple question. Which kind of value are we actually talking about? It really comes down to these three questions. First, are we talking about dating value? What makes someone an attractive partner? Second, are we talking about social value? This is about what gets you respect and status in a group, like at work or with friends. Or third, are we talking about self-worth, which is totally different? That's someone's own internal sense of their own value. Once you separate these three, the whole picture becomes so much clearer and the arguments get a lot less heated. Ultimately, the big takeaway from this analysis is that value isn't a fixed trait assigned at birth or earned on a single universal path. It's about which signals are being prioritized in a specific situation. It's a dynamic process of context-driven signaling. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Now that you have this framework, this idea of a signal economy, it's worth taking a moment to think about it. When you're sizing someone up, or even when you're judging yourself, which signals are you paying the most attention to? And more importantly, why?